Livingston here. I'm going to do this morning a drawing with pencil materials and possibly demonstrating with pen material, pen of sorts, to be able to show you a couple different techniques for drawing a still life. In this case, it's a teapot and a couple teacups just ready for a little bit of a social between two friends, which everybody misses these days, I'm sure. But it was a simple little thing that you can set up at home and practice this on your own time and have a good time with it. So join me and we'll walk through this. So here we have our setup for the teacup, and I want to just walk through the process that I did in starting the thinking about what I was going to do. I did a little thumbnail sketch. You can see it's very tiny, but it just positions some of the elements in there that I want to put in. It's changed a little bit in the actual setup, but that's how it starts. And some of the format that you can use, I'm going to work large here like this. I think it's a little easier for demonstrating purposes. If I was working personally in front of my, with my sketchbook, I could work with a size something like this, and just you put it up, put the object in front of you and study it carefully. Some other flower arrangements, but a sketchbook like this, and you'd want to be working sort of facing you rather than having it flat on the table. It kind of distorts the perspective a little bit if you're doing it that way. It's kind of better to work so that it's up on the same plane as you are facing the thing. So if I was working on this with on my lap, I'd be working with it at a bit of an angle like that. So let's start. All right. So we're going to begin this drawing, and the first thing I want to be doing is looking frequently, looking at the subject matter over there. And you can use any kind of pencil you want, really, on the softer side, anything from, one of your garden variety yellow HB pencils with the rubber tip on it, or you can, what I like using is the Prismacolor Pencil. It's like a 90% warm gray, and it just looks like a regular lead pencil. This is just a big chunk of graphite. It's a 2B, the same as a 2B pencil, and this is a Sharpie. That'll be good. I'll bring that in a little bit later. Anyways, I'm going to sketch this thing out very, very lightly with just a regular pencil, and I look at the thing and see my orientation on it, and my eye level is up a little bit above the object. So I'm just very roughly shaping in, sketching in. I call it mapping. Sometimes you're mapping, creating the map for your drawing, and you look at, if you draw this teacup shape, for instance, and it's a little bit like that, then you look at the line relationships to that and the saucer, and where the line of the saucer comes around and joins the side of the cup. The teacup handle is down here, attaches. And then there's the teapot back there. And follow where that line of the base comes in underneath here. A little bit of a shape. And the handle. And the purpose of doing this lightly like this is that you can erase. It's not a sin to erase. And it helps you to position these things, and you're looking all over the composition. So that shape of the thing comes down there, and the spout of the teacup, something like that. And we've got a flower vase here and another teacup over here. So I look at the top of this teacup here, sits about even with the curve of the spout here. And there's a little bit of an overlap in front of that other cup and saucer. So, early on here, I observed that my eye level was up above this composition. This other little table here is a little bit lower than where I'm sitting. So the fact that my eye level is up here, I'm going to illustrate that here. Just, it's my eyeball. That's level, okay? I got to turn my gaze a little bit downward to see this here, but my eye level is still up here. And the fact that these circular objects are below my eye level, I can see into the cup, and these shapes here, these round shapes, the saucer and the cup, become ellipses, flattened out circles. I'm not looking at it flat like that. I'm looking at it on the flat, on the horizontal. And this last object in this is this little vase that's sitting here. And sketch that in, and then it's like a flower. You can have a flower or a little sprig of some plastic plants that you might have in the garden. But you're always looking for nuances in the shapes of things. It's not just a round leaf. Sometimes they've got ribs and wrinkles and curves in them. And you just look at something about the structure of that plant, let your eyes move around, become familiar with the arrangement here. And, okay, a couple more. It doesn't have to be exactly as it stands, but depending on how realistic you want the subject you're drawing to be, be patient. It takes a patience and more time to observe and execute all the details that you're seeing there. These teacup the subject might be kind of an interesting thing to do some patterns with. The ones on these here are pretty subtle, not heavily defined. And I'll just do something in the background here, a little bit of indication of this frame that I put in the background, just for something a little bit more behind here. And that's at a bit of an angle. It's not absolutely flat on for me here. And these little openings, it'll be something like a window setting ready for a tea party. If you wanted to use a ruler, go ahead, get a ruler. You can straighten up those lines. I prefer working loose like this. You might notice here that I'm using my pencil, I'm holding it a little bit off, not crunching down like that. I find this way I can work in bigger strokes and not getting hung up in detail. If you're getting into the detail, then sure, yeah, you want to refine that shape a little bit, choke down on the pencil a bit and do it. Okay, with that, just ordinary pencil, that's where I'm going to go with that. Now I'm going to switch to this Prismacolor pencil. I like that because of the tone that it lays down, the color, if you want, but it doesn't erase. So that's why I did this loose drawing first with the ordinary pencil. With this, I can get a little bit darker. This crayon here would be similar, and it's what you put down here. So I'll look now at refining this a little bit, and I'm going around and I'm looking at sort of a scalloped edge around this. This will take a little bit of time. You see, I just choked down on my pencil to get a little bit more control over that. And you'll take one item at a time and just observe how the shape of that, and refine it a little bit. This one's a simpler shaped teacup and then a little bit of a flare on it. And look into that. A little bit of a flare at the top there. You put that in the drawing. And that shape of the pencil, of the handle. And just keep looking back at any little thing that you're drawing, where you're at, and really study the shape of that. Here, in this case, with the light in the background, that's a good point now to mention on that. I've got the light on in the background, and it's giving me one good strong light, but I'm in a room here now with lights, overhead lights, fluorescent lights, and it's giving me shadows all over the place. So we'll demonstrate with turning the lights off in a second here, and you can see what the difference is. Okay, can do that. Okay, lights are off. See how much darker that gets? It's a little too dark for me to see what I'm doing here on the page, but it lights the subject with one light source, and you get some definite shadows. And this I'm going to use as my shading eventually, but I'll go back to putting the lights on after I've identified where these shadows are falling. You got some strong base shadow underneath the teapot, and some strong shadows coming off the saucer and the teacup down here. The light is just a little over to the right there, and some strong shadows underneath there. Again, on even these white objects here, they will have some shadow to them too. So I just indicate that lightly, and I'll come out a little bit later and refine that shadow. But the shadows are help to give your subject a little bit of roundness and three-dimensional look. We'll go back to the teapot now. Start at the top here and get a sense of the shape of that lid, the little knob at the top. It's got a stem. There's no timeline on this. It's a kind of thing that you sit down and give yourself the amount of time you need to be able to do a study like this. Try not to be pressured by having to stop and make dinner or go out shopping. If you can, set it up on a table by a window or by the light, but set it up once and set your drawing panel, whatever your surface is, set that up so that you don't have to move it. And then you can come back to it right and just pick up where you left off. So a nice smooth line around there. And then here I can start looking at some of the reflections and the lights and the darks and the highlights on the spout, on the teapot. And you move to another piece and come back to this. It's just, you're seeing the whole study all at once and slowly bringing it up, bringing it to life. It's the shading and the play between lights and darks, that's called contrast. And it's that shading that gives your object a three-dimensional look. If I was painting this, I think I'd maybe paint this teapot a little brighter color. Look at the shape of that handle. See how it attaches to the teapot. Starting to take shape. Because most of the light, that strong light, is on the back side over here. My darker shadows are going to be on the left side of all the objects. That goes throughout the whole picture. Okay, so this little shape at the top, it's got some dark side around it here and some dark reflection down here. You need a fairly sharp pencil. I start with my shading a little bit lighter, and then put a little more pressure. It comes up stronger and goes down darker. I look carefully at how the reflections of the room and the objects around it are reflecting in the teapot. It's a shiny surface. Any reflective surface like glass or shiny things or a mirror are going to reflect the materials and the objects around it. And sometimes it's tricky to distinguish it, but if you just slow down and don't let this intimidate you, it's a good exercise of observation to see how the light works and reflects off objects, causes the shadows. Even the reflection of this handle is seen in the teapot there. And there's a big shadow around here. The teacups are reflected in here. I won't get into that too much detail. It's just a light spot in there. But if you wanted to take it to that high end of detail, then that's something that you would make note of in the drawing of that. So pressing a little bit harder now to get this dark shadow back over it. The technique for this type of shading using a pencil, you can keep that pencil on the paper and rub it back and forth, and a little bit extra pressure gives you some extra darkness. It's quite a different technique to render these, a kind of subject like this, render shadows and shapes. It's quite a different technique using a pen, a sharp drawing pen or a Sharpie. I'll try to demonstrate that partway along through here. Now this dark teapot in the background, it's going to play a big part in bringing this teacup out a little bit forward. We slowly build up some tone in this area. That's just sort of a light pressure. And the light against dark, the light shape against the dark will help to bring the teacup more forward and give the image a kind of depth and a perception of depth. So it's quite dark down here. I'll move on now and just finish up doing this, giving it a dark tone to it. Overlap again, you can change the angle of your pencil, coming strokes this way, and over top it's like cross hatching or building up your tone. And while I'm at it, I might indicate something of the shadow underneath here, this cast shadow, cast from that one strong light that's over on the other side there. Some people collect teapots and teacups. Some people collect figurines. Some people collect tools. You know, any grouping of objects would do for a subject setup like this at home. If you got a collection of Barbie dolls, sure, go ahead. Okay, that heavy shadow underneath there too. Now this object, this vase here, you can see it's got a little bit of a scalped edge or a rippled edge around it, and it's white. It's a white object, so I gotta use the negative space behind it, behind these objects. I got to keep that in mind. Positive space and negative space. The objects here in the whole setup, that is your positive space. The negative space is the space that's around it. And as you move around here, you know, this becomes the negative space for the vase, and this becomes the negative space for the teacup. So it moves around, but it's subject and background, and your play of tone, darkness and light and shadow, your play of tone in the background or negative space will help to describe the picture. A little darker tone behind a white object so it stands out better. A little bit of a trick to try to get the symmetry of something, the symmetry of the cup, but a little bit of practice, that too will come to be. Try to look carefully at the leaf arrangement here. Looks like there's another leaf coming out behind it. It might look nice and cheery with a little flower in that if you had a flower to choose from. See, I'm moving around this edge slowly, but in the time I'm doing this line here, I've looked at that subject matter half a dozen times just to kind of get it in my mind how that leaf structure is, where that line goes. You're looking at line shape relationships, how one shape relates to or nudges up against another, and you build your drawing accordingly. We'll do a little bit more here. However much detail you want to put in there, that's what you got to look at. You can leave it quite general and sketchy, or you can get busy and do the detail. I'm going to try to indicate here a soft shadow around the side of this. A little bit of darker tone here in the negative space for this teacup so that it stands out by the time I'm finished. It's a fairly light touch at the moment with this tone. Carefully going around that. And bring out the handle on that teacup. Look at it several times as you're sketching out that line. Yeah. So as you spend the time on this, it'd be a good idea to take a photograph of it when you start, so that you, and I did that, took a couple of shots of it so that if I wanted to do more on this after I'm finished the demonstration part here, if I want to do more at it, I could look at the photograph that I took from this angle and be able to come right back and just remind myself of the relationship of these shapes to one another. The more tone I put in there, the more that these objects come out and stand forward a little bit. Some cast shadow on the side of this cup. We should put some tea in the cup, I think. Yeah. And a little bit of shadow coming off the cup onto the saucer. That cup should have some tea in it too. Okay, so that's starting to describe that picture and bringing out the shapes, the round, how the shadows interplay. Even we can extend a little bit of tone under here, out here, just to keep some highlight. The highlights stay white, okay? The paper, use the paper as your highlight. slowly building. This teapot is the darkest thing in the whole composition. It's a dark brown. So the stronger I can put that, and it's a very reflective surface too. So the darks on here are very dark. The curvature, you'll see the curvature of the side of the teapot distorts the shadows or the reflections that are coming from around the room. It gives it a little, it's like a lens. It distorts it a bit. And build up these tones. I can even see my own reflection in here if I wanted to put myself in here as a little bit of tone. And slowly it builds. Some shadow here, and note that the shadow coming off the teacup here. I want to show a little bit of a different aspect of drawing here with a different material, with a pen. In this case I'll use the Sharpie. That's a little better. Okay. Now, where with the pencil, I've been just putting it down and doing, moving it back and forth and just constantly laying down tone. The technique with a drawing pen or you can even go down to the small little pen like that that's got a fine line. The technique for building in tone, it's not just outlining the drawing, but you're building in tone here with, I'm going to outline here this shape of this window behind. Just a line. Okay, everybody knows how to do that, but it's, if you're putting in tone in there, you're single strokes, okay? It's not like the pencil where you just put it down and rub it back and forth. You're doing individual lines. You're lifting it each time. You're doing a single little scratch line on there. In this case, the negative space behind the flowers here, or the branch. That's cross-hatching, or hatching, hatch marks going in this direction. See, they're individual lines. If I want to build up that tone a little bit darker, you go the opposite direction and it becomes cross-hatching. You're crossing those initial lines. This Sharpie is putting down a fairly thick line. It's fairly definite. cross-hatching. Doesn't really matter which way those cross-hatchings go, but the denser you make those patterns, the denser you lay down those lines, the darker that area becomes. That's with the Sharpie. It's a fairly thick tip. If I use one of these drawing pins, this is a, what is it? It's a 01, very, very fine. I don't know if you even know if you can see that on there, but it's the same technique. It just gives you very fine texture, and it's going to take a lot longer to fill in those areas if you're trying to get it fairly dark. But you're crossing, again another direction, and you're building up those tones. In the sport of drawing, this would be a good technique to learn as well. Takes a long time. You can see how it has brought out that drawing of the plants there. Okay, continuing. Just put another tone in this. Go back to the pencil. Actually, I'll use this crayon thing, this 2B graphite pencil. It's just like a regular pencil. That should be erasable. I've never used this thing, it's brand new. It should be erasable if you felt so inclined, but any erasing should probably be done at the beginning stage after you've had a chance to sort of sketch it out. Once you start laying down some heavy tone, it becomes a little more difficult to erase. Come up to the edge, to the perimeter of that area. If you needed to define that a little sharper, then sure. Just make your hatch marks go against that line. Come up to the line, feather it out, and you're layering up, you're layering more tone into that. And it builds. So this would be a good way of starting a painting if one had in mind to do a painting of a nice set of teacups and a teapot, doing the little thumbnail sketch and then working from an actual still life setup. Do that study. It's study time while you're doing this. You're looking at the shapes and you'll think of some things you might want to change in doing the painting. You've got your photograph to refer to if you're coming back to it and want that information to check. You can use that pencil tip on there or go for big flat area. A big pencil like this is a big piece of graphite, and on the flat like that you can cover some tonal area pretty quickly. nice bit of depth that one could put into a picture like this. If this was a window, you could put some scenery out the window, or a cat looking in the window, or the back fence. Just make your picture deeper. But then you'd have to get into perspective. More perspective. We've got perspective working. That's a good point to bring up right now. We've got perspective working for us here in the fact that we've got this object in front of this object, and this is in front of this, and the frame is behind that. So you're stepping back in layers. I'm going to go back to this Prismacolor pencil here. That's, I think, perhaps my favorite drawing tool. I like the tone that it puts down, but it doesn't smudge. Ordinarily in a drawing you might not blend two different techniques like the pen and the hatching as well as the pencil, because they give such different feels to the drawing. Your pencil drawing is generally quite a bit softer looking, and the pen work tends to be sharper and heavier and darker. Takes a little bit of confidence working with that pen and ink, because once it's down, you can't do anything with it. Working with a regular lead pencil like that big crayon here, I could erase that. Working with the Prismacolor, not quite as easy, but that's why I did that initial pencil sketch first, in case I had to erase something just to check it. Okay. And we'll build up this tone across the bottom of the teapot. This drawing does not have a lot of physical depth to it. It's not very far between here and back here. It's only maybe 18 inches. If you were working a subject matter where you had several hundred feet or a mile or something, looking down a country road or across some fields, your distance would be something that you could, we'll maybe do that another day. But it's quite a different subject matter to do it, a little tabletop study like this. Another nice subject to do with a drawing like pencil drawing or pen and ink would be if you've got a collection of dolls or teddy bears. I've done a couple like that in class before. Not that I've got a collection of that stuff, but I found some to bring in. But if you did a collection of something, it's of related objects, that kind of makes a nice, interesting subject matter to execute as an art piece. So as I'm doing this, I'm always looking back to the setup on the table, just to see where it needs to be a little bit darker and bring it out a little bit sharper. I can layer up those darks. this side of the teacup here would have a little bit of a shadow on it because the light's coming from the right hand side. It's a light touch. Just like in the painting, when you get into the fine details and later on in the piece, the actual changes that you see to the drawing kind of slows down a little bit. It takes more time to bring up some of these smaller details. A little more pressure on the pencil. Now I know this tablecloth that I have out here is white. The teapot is quite dark, but if I want to bring out that shape, it doesn't hurt to use your tonal judgment and throw a little more dark in the background to be even darker than the teapot. Or if you leave an edge like that where there's a little bit of light catching around the side of that object, you can leave that line. Be a nice challenge to draw if you had a fancy embroidered or crocheted kind of a placemat or tablecloth here with a pattern. That could be a nice, make for a nice drawing. Challenging to be sure, but it'd be a nice texture to put into a drawing like this. You see how this white teacup here with just this little bit of shadow on here, it's about the same as this. So if I darken the shape here, darken that down a little bit, it pops that teacup out a little bit further to the front. Just slowly bring that up. Don't go too heavy, too fast. Back a little bit into this and work with this pen and the Sharpie here and define some of these shapes up here, bring them up a little bit stronger. Outline that. And you can get in there and do some of those darks in there to bring out flowers. The more hatch work in that negative space that I've been working with really brings it up. I said it's not absolutely common not often that you would be combining these two techniques on the same drawing. I would think it would be either pencil or pen, but you can see the intensity that brings to the picture, that definition. fine pen here, it has an even more delicate touch to it. Being pencil here, you can, if you wanted, if you were so inclined, go back over some of these areas and introduce that pen and ink, but pen and ink pen. You can introduce the drawing into that, the tones and the hatching, but it doesn't look as smooth and soft in shading as the pencil work. Just a little bit more tone into the darkness of the pot here. A little more heavy pressure on that pencil. Just a tiny little bits of highlight through there that's picking it up. I'm layering over the pencil that was put down before. So that Teapot becomes a very strong presence on the page. But through the use of the tones in the background, in the negative space, and that it's not quite as stark as sitting on everything white. Introduce a little bit of depth to that picture, a sense of roundness. So there's a lot of range that you can put down with pencil, with this Prismacolor anyway, a lot of range. And pencil pressure if you're just using an ordinary pencil, or if you switch to a softer pencil. That's a good point to bring up at this point too. Pencil types, like I mentioned, the ordinary yellow tip pencil with your eraser, a lot of those are HB pencils. That's something that you would use for everyday purposes, and that's a general pencil that most everybody would have available. As pencils go, there's a range of hardnesses that you can get. You notice the little letters at the top of the shaft of the pencil, and it would say, in this case, it said 4B. That's a very soft pencil and would lay down a lot of dark with pressure. It would, if it said 2H or 4H, that's a harder pencil, and it's more for light sketching. Just and it doesn't. You really have to press hard to put down much darkness. So you can learn to work with your different types of pencils. If you have one of those box sets where there's several different ones, people are always curious as to what's the difference in pencils mean. There's dark shadow here. This edge here of the spout is picking up a lot of light from the light source over here. So if I darken the negative space up to that edge, it helps to pop it forward. I think for the purposes of this demonstration, I think it's done what I wanted to do for you. Show you the possibilities of setting up a still life in your dining room or near a window somewhere, to setting up using objects that are of interest to you or that you find pleasing to look at, and interesting shapes. So it's got a lot of roundness to it, the shapes. And I'll bring out the roundness on these objects more. Define that. A little bit of darker tone in the background, in the negative space here. Helps bring the positive shapes forward. Because white on white doesn't stand out too much. You'd use the tone to just establish a little bit of tonal difference between the object and the negative space around it. This shadow here comes looking at the subject again. It's fairly dark under there. Over and over and over again. Just seeing that whole shape and the tonality that builds it up. You put that tone down there and then you can't distinguish the shadow, so the shadow just goes a little bit darker still. Another drawing tool would be charcoal or chalks. I remember doing that in art college. They set us up with a big drawing pad like this and a stack of charcoal. And you're generally working much bigger. You don't work with little bits of detail. The charcoal drawing is to help loosen you up, but it's awful messy, and I'd come out of class with black all over the side of my hands, and not a pleasant material to work with. I believe that for drawing is kind of essential. It's a very useful skill to have. For the kind of subject matter that I'd like to see in doing my paintings. So most of my paintings are drawing based, where they've got something that there's something in the subject matter that it ends up looking like what you want it to. If you didn't draw it, well, it's pretty chancy that it's going to end up looking a little bit loosey-goosey. Anyways, I think I will leave that now. We can call that a finished demonstration, and hopefully you can take this and find that subject matter, do a little setup for yourself, and practice the drawing. Just remember to look frequently at your subject. If you want to draw in this area, you'll look at the teapot and see what's going on in that reflection. If you're doing the teacup, maybe there's a pattern on it. In this case, there's a rose sitting on there, or there's a little floral pattern. It's very delicate, but you could put a stronger image on that. That's where imagination comes into play. That's another story altogether. So we'll leave this for now. I'll probably maybe tickle around on this a little bit more afterwards. And that final shot can come out, but let's leave it for now and call it a day. And thank you very much for being with me.